Hey everyone, we're pleased to announce that this episode of the 84 Million Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Luxfolio. Inspired by Bitcoin's success as a corporate treasury asset, the team at Luxfolio is pioneering the Litecoin treasury strategy as the very first publicly traded Litecoin treasury company. Confident in Litecoin as a hard, scarce, and sound digital currency, Luxfolio is proving that digital silver is now institutional grade. With a robust Litecoin balance sheet, Luxfolio is committed to actively supporting the Litecoin ecosystem, collaborating with developers, miners, media, and others, promoting further Litecoin adoption. Luxfolio is setting the standard for Litecoin adoption at the corporate level. Learn more at luxfolio.com, luxxfolio.com. When it comes to mining, pools matter. This is why we recommend POWERPOOL. POWERPOOL is a mining pool built by miners to maximize profits. If you're mining from home or have a larger scaled operation, use POWERPOOL for the best payouts. POWERPOOL supports SHA-256, X11, Blake 2S, EagleSong, K-Heavy Hash, and of course our favorite, S-CRYPT for Litecoin, Dogecoin, Bellscoin, and others. Mining with POWERPOOL is easy with its simple user interface, and the platform has all the reporting exports that you're looking for. POWERPOOL typically charges a 1% fee, but if you use the 84 million link in the show notes, you will pay less than 1%, which is excellent. So sign up, point your machines, and start mining with POWERPOOL for lower fees and better payouts. Cheers, happy mining. Hello and welcome to the 84 Million Podcast. Today we're on episode number 45, and our guest today is Seth For Privacy. Let me give him an introduction and we'll jump right in. Seth For Privacy is Vice President of Cakewallet and host of the Opt Out podcast. He can be found on X at Seth For Privacy. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kyle. Really excited to jump into it.
I know I've seen you just a few months ago. What is it, 2 months ago now at the Litecoin Summit? You were on a panel there, talked about Cake. We want to get into all of that, but maybe just let's start on the ground floor. What is privacy? We're going to talk about privacy today. I think it's our first real privacy-centric episode. You're the guy to have that conversation with. It's in your screen name. So what is privacy? And just kind of define it before we start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very straightforward. I think there's a lot of kind of like odd connotations that come with this idea of privacy, but in all reality, it's just you having the ability to choose. That's all that privacy is we want the individual to be the one who chooses who has their data, what they can do with it, rather than some faceless corporation, some nation state. Privacy is just reclaiming that choice, having the ability to reveal what you want, keep what you want private, and really that's all that it is. It's not that complex of an idea, but obviously with the state of the world right now, the state of the internet right now, the state of surveillance expanding from corporations and nation states, it's tricky when we try to put that into practice because taking that control of your data is not as straightforward as it may sound at first, but is really, really vital because ultimately the rest of our human rights, human flourishing, human freedom, they all fall apart very quickly if privacy does not exist. And so that's why it's such a passion for me. But yeah, really simply just the ability to choose who you reveal what about yourself to.
Yeah. I think, and we want to talk about all of those things you just laced in that comment. The internet, especially, we're living in a very digital world. Obviously, cryptocurrencies is the Litecoin podcast. This is digital money. But in terms of just kind of where are we in 2025 in terms of maybe the general person's expectation of privacy, or maybe that's not the right way to put it. What's the general state of privacy for the person operating on and offline in 2025? Just how do you see it?
Yeah, I think I feel like we're kind of in this juxtaposition right now of two things where in some ways 2025 feels like the year of privacy, like so many fantastic privacy tools, adoption of privacy tools has gone through the roof already this year. I mean, Litecoin MWeb is a great example where that's taking off. We're seeing more wallets add MWeb support. So in many ways, I feel like 2025 is like one of the most optimistic and hopeful years in a long time where people are waking up and the tools are actually ready for them to start taking their privacy seriously. But as has always been the case in the crypto wars and this eternal struggle between governments and corporations and the sovereign individual. It's an arms race. So the better privacy gets, the more people wake up to the need for personal privacy, the more they actually take actionable steps to reclaim their personal privacy, the more those who would seek to surveil and control ramp up their efforts. So we've also seen that already in 2025 as well, where we've seen this insane ID verification thing sweeping across the EU, where just to be able to watch a video or go on a website, you have to submit your ID and prove who you are, which may sound okay at a first glance, but the concept of some random internet website that you like having to store all of your personal information and hoping that they don't get hacked, which will happen. It will happen. There will be massive ID leaks from this program. There's obviously that downside. At the same time, we have some pivotal cases going on in the US that can define what ability a developer or company has to create privacy tools and be protected under the law if somebody uses those things for bad things, for illicit usage, even if they weren't able to prevent it as a company or as a piece of software. We have the Samurai Wallet case, which unfortunately they've switched their plea to pleading guilty, which is very discouraging, but we'll be keeping an eye out for what the sentencing looks like and if more info comes out on that. We have the Roman Storm case, who was one of the co-creators of Tornado Cash, which the jury is deliberating again today. We'll see on that a very pivotal moment on the legal side of things. And I think that is really a response to the fact that in the privacy space, it really does feel like we're winning. It can feel very dark and depressing if you just look at the news or you just look at social media and how this is talked about. But the reason those efforts, the reason the cases are ramping up, the reason the ID verification is ramping up is because governments feel like they're losing control, that they're losing the ability to surveil and control what the individual citizen is able to do. And that's because the tools are getting better than ever. More and more people are waking up and taking advantage of what's available to them. So yeah, I think that's kind of a quick state of privacy in 2025.
Very good. And I'd like to unpack some of them. Some of these things I know about generally. Some of them I've not been really focused on at all, but I am interested in your opinion of it. For example, the Roman Storm case, things like this. I think, even me framing the question, it's like, you're defending privacy. That already basically suggests it's under attack. You've mentioned a few of the actors, governments, corporate players. Maybe some of these are benevolent and they seem to be out for us and, just looking at our good. I think that's always how it's marketed. But like you said, there's hacks and you're building databases that are just targets for people that are legitimately or overtly bad actors grabbing that data. And I think this is really problematic. I can say in the old world, we had our protections. We can think of in the United States, we have the Constitution and certain amendments that relate to privacy and your personal affects and things like this. Have these physical safeguards and law been carried over to the digital? And I think we're probably still young. I mean, the internet's from like the 90s in terms of consumer use. Have these things been carried over? What's your take on that? I don't know how much you've looked into legislation or legal, precedents set with the digital so far in our kind of new world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the legislative side of privacy rights or privacy laws, whether pro or anti-privacy, have lagged behind quite a lot, which is always the case with new and emerging technologies, that it takes a very long time for governments to actually grapple with what those mean, to look at both the good and bad regulation or laws that they would like to pass. I think it's also easy, and I fall into this trap frequently, to assume that everyone in the government has this huge malicious plan for how they're going to abuse the internet to turn us all into robots and seamlessly control all of us. I do not think that is reality, and I would actually venture to guess that most people in your government are actually well-meaning and think they're doing things that are useful. Even with this, the Child Safety Act that is enforcing all of this ID verification. Yes, I am sure that there are people, especially at the top, that are malicious, that are trying to use this for more nefarious means. But there's also a lot of people who mean well, and they think that this legitimately helps children's safety online, but they aren't grappling with the ramifications there. So I think that's definitely the case where the legislation around this has lagged behind. I think that's really why we've seen the Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash cases being pushed so hard in the U.S., despite the current sitting president basically telling the Department of Justice to drop these and not to prosecute. The reason that they're continuing is really because it feels like the government is essentially grasping at straws of how they're going to contain this concept of private digital money and how they're going to make it harder for people to build things that don't have backdoors for the government or that don't have an easy angle towards transparency so that they can see everything that's happening. And again, I don't think that's all this like grand malicious scheme that no one should have privacy, but rather they view it as them losing a little bit of control in the law enforcement tasks that they feel are necessary. They're used to, unfortunately, in cryptocurrency, following the money being really easy, way easier than with cash, which is by far and away the more common thing used in crimes. And cryptocurrency actually makes it a lot easier, except when it comes to privacy tooling. So again, I think it's really that things have lagged so far behind that they're trying to catch up, and it takes so long to get new legislation passed that now they're trying to essentially get legislation through precedent. So instead of having to go through Congress, instead of having to go through the normal legislative process, they're trying to get convictions, which they can then use as precedents, which they can then enforce, like outside of the normal jurisdiction of the law. So I do definitely think that it's lagged behind. I mean, thankfully we have, especially in the US, a very good precedent of code as free speech, which has held up so far and has been like pivotal in the ability for people to actually build and distribute free and open source software without essentially unlimited liability. And a lot of that is what's at stake right now is, will that continue or will that fall by the wayside in the wake of these cases? So that's where we'll see. But there has been some good holdovers from the crypto wars in the 90s. But I think a lot of people thought that ended the crypto wars, but that was just the latest round. And we're seeing, I think, the latest, or I should say the latest round of the crypto wars is happening right now.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about code being free speech, and that's the First Amendment, right? So I remember several years ago, and this is kind of early Bitcoin days. Do you remember that 3D printed, I think it was called the Liberator? It was like a really rudimentary pistol or whatever. And I want to say it was defense distributed. I can't remember anymore. It's been a long time. But I remember these things coming under attack, and they're just like, this is information sharing. How do we shut this down under the First Amendment? So I agree that code is free speech. Even unpopular speech, right? I think the internet is interesting because we grew up kind of in the early days of the internet, I feel, the 90s or whatever, when it was becoming more home-to-home, consumer-based information access. And I think it feels like, maybe it was just because I was a kid, but it felt kind of like very open, primitive, kind of the Wild West, probably not some great ways, to be honest, especially just you're talking about kids and things like this. But I didn't feel that it was as surveilled, I guess. And again, you're talking about a 10-year-old using the internet versus someone a lot older. We're thinking about different things in the world. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was just we were young and naive, and it was always surveilled, and information was never private. Or maybe it was. I don't know. I have to think. Was it illusion to think the early days of the internet were more private versus, let's say, everything in a bucket now in 2025? Or how do you take that? I mean, are we more or less free on the internet, or is it about the same?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say we're less free on the internet. I think it's easy to conflate the ideas of anonymity and privacy. Like I think privacy was very poor in the early days of the internet because it wasn't really necessary. we didn't have social media in the sense that we have today. We didn't have ad agencies seeking to hoover up all of our data. Like we didn't have a lot of the problems then that we have now. And we also had this relatively default state of pseudonymity in the internet, if not anonymity. Like obviously that did, but it was it was the norm. It was weird if you went by your normal name. When I was like you did not go by your real name. You had a pseudonym, and that was just how it was. Like there was no idea of like, I'm going to put my picture up. I'm going to use my real name. Like none of this was true, and that has totally shifted. Along with, I think at that time there was some naivete and maybe false optimism that like this new thing could not be corrupted. And I don't want to speak for everybody because I know there have been people talking about this since before the dawn of the internet, what could go wrong with this concept. But I think like from my perspective, there's often this idea with new technology that provides human freedom that no matter what, it's going to be a good and that it cannot be corrupted. I think a lot of the same thing happens with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies where we have this idea of like this amazing new technology is here. We're going to win now. Like it's over. We don't have to worry about it. We're going to win. And that idea is extraordinarily dangerous because essentially all technology is net neutral by default. It comes out. I mean, there obviously are some things that are like not necessarily net neutral, but basically all technology comes out. It's net neutral. The internet, I think you could view as neutral at the start. Bitcoin, I think you could view as neutral at the start. But all that matters is how it's going to be used. Very much so. Like let's focus on Bitcoin. Bitcoin could be a massive net positive for society. Litecoin could be a massive net positive for society. But also by default, both are quite transparent. Both can be co-opted in some very specific ways. Mining centralization specifically can be done to control who can transact with who and what exactly can be done on chain. There are a lot of ways that they could actually turn out to be worse for society than something like cash, than something like fiat in many ways. And a lot of that comes down to like, how are we going to actually provide power to the individual no matter what other people are trying to do? And it's easy to get caught up at this naivete of like, it provides freedom right now, so I don't need to worry about the long term. Or it provides freedom right now, even if it's transparent, but so I don't have to worry about privacy now. And I think that was pretty true in the early internet days. Like there weren't all of these bad actors that we have today that understand the power that they can have, that understand the new economy based around users' data and private information. There weren't those bad actors in the early days, which let it be much more free, let it be much more exploratory and much more niche. Whereas today, everyone essentially in the world is on the internet at this point, and there's massive money to be made. And the downside of capitalism, which has a lot of upsides, is that people will find a way to make money on anything, even if it is malicious or harmful. They'll find a way to do it. And so we're combating all of that today. And I think a lot of the early choices throughout the growth of the internet were not helpful in helping us kind of get ahead of the problems that we have right now. And instead, we're essentially trying to now backtrack back to how the internet was before through the use of cryptography, through the use of privacy tools. We're trying to get people back to the state that was the default, really, back in the day. And that's very hard to unwind what's happened at this point.
I think you're mentioning about everyone using a pseudonym is huge. And yeah, that is almost non-existent now. Maybe on the surface level it is. You can set up an X account and have whatever be whatever you want. But I mean, you're still giving Twitter or X a decent amount of information, right? Yeah, that's a big change. I mean, even to get an email address, you have to provide all this information now. When you used to be able to just go and sign up with whatever you want, whatever birthday you wanted, whatever name you wanted. It didn't really matter. You just had to fill out some fields. I'm not telling people to lie. I'm just saying it was very simple to register these accounts. And it's very difficult to do that now without really other links to proving kind of who you are. So again, there's probably some pros and cons, but again, it's definitely different. Okay. In terms of, before we look at kind of the traditional finance and cryptocurrencies, just kind of the last thing here in the internet protection, you mentioned earlier about backdoors being built into things. I know different governments have taken different stances on encryption or this idea of putting a backdoor for the use of the state or law enforcement. What about VPNs? Are you overall saying this is a good tool in the arsenal to be using, or are these all just other buckets to be surveilled?
It's a great question, and VPNs honestly are a delicate subject because there's a lot of like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, a lot of FUD around the concept of VPNs. There's a lot of really good VPNs, and there's a lot of really malicious VPNs that abuse everything in the book to try and make money, no matter the harm to the end user. So just like anything, there's not really a black and white answer. I would say generally VPNs are a fantastic, like low-hanging fruit tool for the person who's seeking privacy online. But the very important thing to keep in mind is that VPNs do not remove trust, they shift trust. So all that a VPN is doing is it is letting you choose who you want to have some visibility into your activity And ideally, to shift the trust away from an entity who knows everything about you, like your internet service provider who knows your name, they have your ID, they know where you live, they know all of this information about you. It's very, very, very bad that someone who knows everything about you also knows everything about your online activity. And while technically an ISP can't know everything about what you do, thanks to things like HTTPS, in reality, the tools are available and are widely deployed that allow them to basically understand everything about what you're doing online, except for some granular detail. But even metadata alone is enough to know essentially everything that you're doing online. So you don't want those two things connected. You don't want identity and activity connected. What a VPN lets you do is it lets you choose to disconnect identity and activity and shift to letting someone else essentially see your activity. Now, that sounds weird because a VPN is always pitched as a privacy tool. It is, but only because now the entity that can see your activity is somebody who has a financial obligation to provide privacy, because the way that they make money is by providing privacy. And now you can use a provider who knows nothing about you, especially like one of the most powerful things about crypto that's quickly forgotten is that the ability to pay for a good and service without revealing anything about yourself is wildly powerful, especially online. So now I can get a VPN. I can pay directly in Bitcoin, Monero, Litecoin, reveal nothing about myself to the VPN provider, and now shift that trust from my ISP to a VPN provider. Thankfully, there are fantastic VPN providers. I'll list ones that I know are very good, and I will caution you to use any VPNs that aren't very well vetted and well recommended within the privacy space, because the majority that you'll see online, especially in advertisements on YouTubers' channels and stuff like that, are purely malicious. Many are run by the same company who are just finding ways to essentially siphon money from you and then also sell your data at the end of the day.
Wonderful.
It's awful. It's really sad that people, especially within the privacy space, would abuse that. But again, it's unfortunately the reality of the world we live in. So some really, really good ones that I'd recommend. There's really, I would say 3, maybe 4, if you want to stretch a little bit, that are no-brainer options, highly recommended, well vetted. Those are Mullvad VPN. I would say this is probably the most broadly recommended, most broadly trusted VPN service. They accept crypto directly for payments. They're basically the best out there, the most well understood. Highly recommend Mullvad VPN. A really interesting kind of newcomer on the block that actually leverages Mullvad VPN is called Obscura VPN. I've been able to talk to the founder quite a bit. They're doing a really fascinating model, which is essentially like a dual entity model. So Obscura runs the first server, Mullvad runs the exit server, and they can't see any of the activity unless they collude. So now, assuming, again, they could collude, so it is still essentially a promise, but they have financial incentives not to collude. Now, not only are you shifting the activity visibility away from the person who knows your ID, but now you can actually remove the ability to view your activity entirely from the VPN. They work closely with Mullvad. They use Mullvad exit servers. They're a fantastic option. They're who I'm using across all my devices right now, but I've used everybody that I'll mention and could recommend them all. The third one I would recommend is iVPN, which has a very similar model to Mullvad. A little bit of a smaller player, but fantastic team. I know multiple members on the team, have talked to them at length. They're really, really like laser focused on, just respecting your privacy, keeping things simple. They work very well across the board as well. The fourth one I'll mention just very briefly is Proton VPN. I love Proton as a company. I have never particularly loved Proton VPN compared to the alternatives, not because of a lack of privacy. I just find that the apps and the experience have just not been quite as good as the others on the list. But if you're already a Proton user, you probably already have Proton VPN access and don't know it. If you're a paid user at all, I think you get some level of Proton VPN access. So that may be a good first step to try if you already have a subscription. You can download the app, try it out, and then check out something else if you want to expand past that. But yeah, those are my main recommendations. Again, be very wary of using anything outside of those recommendations. I'm sure there are some good ones outside of that, but the majority are going to be essentially scams, which is painful, but is unfortunately the reality we're in.
What are your thoughts? For example, Proton and some of the other VPNs utilize at least to a degree Tor, and Tor is an older concept. It used to be in the Tails operating system, and but again, there's been criticism. What's the state of Tor as you see it? Is that a trustworthy kind of project still?
It absolutely is. It's very different. So you wouldn't use Tor like you would use a VPN. Like the way I consider a VPN is it's something that everyone should have on all the time on all their devices. You will experience a little bit of a headache sometimes when accessing like bank sites and stuff like that. You'll get some more CAPTCHAs. So it's a little bit of a pain, but I have used an always on VPN for years now. And it's not really problematic. It's something I think generally everyone could do all the time. Now, Tor is something that is a much more specific tool, in my opinion. Specifically, I would use it whenever you need the highest level of privacy or anonymity. You're not going to use it to access your bank account, and it'll be pointless because they know who you are anyways. So you're standing out as someone who loves privacy and they know who you are. So you wouldn't use it with anything you essentially would have an account with or something like that. I'd primarily use it like when interacting with any blockchain explorer in the crypto space, any kind of like crypto related service that I want to hide my identity from or my location from. It's also fantastic in the crypto space for actually like how you broadcast a transaction from your wallet. Tor is great because then you can hide the source IP address of where you're coming from when broadcasting the transaction, which can help to provide better kind of network level privacy for you. It's more of a specific tool in your toolbox than something most people will use all the time, but it is still fantastic. The browser itself, Tor browser, is getting better every year, but it is definitely it's kind of a scalpel where normally you need some other tool when you're just doing your day-to-day job, but it's something it's very useful for specific tasks.
Yeah, very good. I know VPNs generally seem that they're more available now, so maybe that's a positive, unless we're using some of these services that you're describing that really aren't that great. But it seems that people are more attuned to what these things are basically and sort of how to use them. And they seem to be more available. For example, I know the Opera browser, mobile and probably online, I could open up to see on occasion. I'll use Opera. I used to use it because they would actually render the IPFS, kind of the crypto domains. But anyway, it seems that they've got some privacy baked in. I know Brave has a internal VPN as well. Your takes on those? Maybe you're not familiar with them.
Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with Brave VPN. I've heard good things. It's not one I've used, so I can't specifically recommend like the user experience or that sort of thing, but I've heard good things. The specific the way that I think about a VPN is I generally prefer it to just be device level, all my traffic going to the VPN.
Right.
There are pros and cons to that. Sometimes it isn't, like I mentioned, sometimes it actually isn't helpful to use a VPN. Like if I am logging into my bank, they already know my home address. Hiding my home IP address from them doesn't help my privacy at all. But the important thing to remember is that a VPN also protects you from your ISP or whatever network you're on. If you're at a Starbucks or something like that, it protects them from gaining insight into your activity online. So to me, the advantages of just device level always on VPN are much more than browser level VPN. There are some like really interesting things that I know some browsers are doing where you can do VPN and it can be like a connection per tab. So you can even have a separate IP address for every website that you're on. That's pretty extreme and has downsides as well. But like that is where there's some more interesting stuff with browser level VPNs. But generally, I like device level. I don't want to have to worry as much about my traffic outside of that. And unfortunately, especially on mobile, most of your traffic is not going through a browser anyways. On desktop, at least, a lot of what we do is in a browser. So it's more impactful. But I generally prefer device level.
Good deal. Social media, before we move on. Social media, everybody's using it. Maybe, again, giving us some dating. We might have had MySpace or Zanga or something. Now there's a lot more out there, and people are on them a lot more. I mean, once upon a time, you could log on to the internet. Now you have to intentionally log off, turn your Wi-Fi off, unplug things. I mean, everyone is online all the time. So social media, I think, is one of those things that's come into kind of the radar of the public a few times over the past, decade plus. But it's a lot of voluntary surveillance. So what do we do with this? How would you recommend someone behave on a social media platform, whether it's where we all are in crypto X, or something like Instagram or TikTok or whatever people are using?
Full stop, you should not be on social media unless you have a very specific reason that is actually beneficial to you, and you can step away for a week and come back and say, yeah, I actually do need to be on here. Social media, unfortunately, started as something well-meaning, and has just been abused and blown wildly out of proportion and is a net negative on society. There are so many studies and reports about how harmful to our mental growth, to our development, to our psyche social media is. And these platforms are not just like, oh, they just happen to develop in a negative way, but the way that they are designed is to literally essentially make you a slave of your endorphins and of the way that your brain works. And they are targeting specifically your human psyche and how to glue your eyes to their screen, because that's how they make money. Like I say this, I know it sounds a little hypocritical because I do have an X account and I do use it. It's my only social media, but I have very, very intentionally chosen to keep an X account and to use it because it's a great funnel to help people to learn about privacy, to help people to learn about how to take things seriously, about how to take actionable steps. And so I view it as it's an educational platform for me that I would not have otherwise. And it gives me a reach that I would not have otherwise. But if you're listening to this and you follow me on X, I would much prefer that you deleted your account and had a better life than if you followed me on X. I don't care about the follower count. I don't care about any of that. It's much better for the vast majority of people to just not be on social media. And something fascinating that I've observed, and I've, like, as somebody who had lots of social media, deleted it all years ago as I started to fall down the privacy rabbit hole, something really interesting has evolved, like within my family dynamic, where I got all of my family on Signal and we essentially have a family group chat. It's become social media, but it's the social media that's actually good in that, like, my family are sharing pictures, they're sharing stories, they're sharing videos, they're sharing voice clips, but only with the people who actually need to see them. Like 100 million people on Facebook don't need to see pictures of my kids. There's no reason for that. Who does is my immediate family or maybe extended family, who I actually care about seeing and interacting with and keeping up with the life of my family. Like it's become so strange that we do so much and capture so much to share with an audience of people who we don't really know. It boggles the mind when you actually step back and think about how crazy what we're doing is and how, like, absurd it is viewed from the lens of any point in history outside of the last, like, 10 years. And so my recommendation is definitely get off social media, abandon it. If you have to stay on it because maybe you have some accounts that are, like, extremely useful to you to follow, unfollow everyone you possibly can in whatever social media you're using. Sometimes there's a way you can view only posts by people you follow. Unfortunately, on some social media, you can't even do that. So you're going to be stuck seeing recommended stuff and ads and all that garbage. But limit it as much as possible. Turn off notifications. Make sure it's something that you get to choose when you use it rather than it sucking you in constantly throughout the day. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could be more negative on social media there, but it's definitely something where, like, I just don't see a benefit there. Even just outside, like, I haven't even talked about the privacy downside of it. I think those are critical as well, especially those of you who have kids. Having pictures of your kids on the internet is already really bad and is only going to become worse with AI, with video generation. There's a lot of terrible stuff that can happen there. But all the privacy stuff aside, just thinking about, like, you as an individual, mentally, psychologically, your life will be better without social media. Pull those friends and family that you actually have real human relationships with, pull them onto a messaging app, something like Signal, so that, again, your communications aren't just surveilled and used for training AI or whatever, and build your own social media. Do it right with people who you actually love, people who you actually care about, and you'll very, very quickly realize that those dopamine hits that you were getting on social media were very, very quick to fade and quick to draw you back in. And the actual experience of growing intimacy with people who you actually know and actually care about will be far, far more rewarding on the long-term scale than anything on social media.
Good words. I'll let that sit for a minute. Yeah, I think you're right on, and it's hard, but you can rewire it. Not only your behavior, but your brain, and you can live away. I remember a few years. Some of my family hated it, but I used what was called a light phone. I don't know if you're familiar with these.
Yeah.
Extremely minimalist, and some people would get, using the word triggered or whatever, they would get upset seeing me use this primitive device, which I thought was actually very beautiful if you looked at it. Maybe a little pricey for what it offered, but it was a very stylish, small, fit in the palm of your hand. And the phone did nothing. I mean, it had a calculator. You could plug in like a stream for podcasts. It had texting, phone calls. I think they have a GPS now, but they didn't have. But it did like 7 things, and it was amazing. There was no social media, there was no browsers, no internet, nothing. And just using that in an environment of almost 2 years until I needed to basically justify having FaceTime again for travel purposes. I loved it, and I felt better on it. So I'm definitely identifying with what you're saying in terms of social media, and it's omnipresent. And yeah, speaking of the younger ones, I think they're really being brought up in it just being normal to put everything out there, and it's like it's not normal. So good words on that. Let's shift to traditional finance versus crypto. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about how, for example, cash, which hasn't been abolished yet, is actually pretty private. I mean, I know a lot of us with libertarian maybe origins or leanings, the Fed and all, and that's all correct. But cash is private. Whether or not you like the Federal Reserve or the system or how it's printed and issued and things like this, it's actually a private tool. Yes, there's serial numbers on them, but I don't know who's doing anything with that, right? Versus Bitcoin and Litecoin on the L1 standard. MWeb changes that for Litecoin, but just say general L1 transactions. Yes, anonymous at one point, but now in an environment of KYC, that's been eliminated. And so what is your take on kind of crypto KYC and the tools we can use within the cryptocurrency space for privacy? And we'll talk about Litecoin specifically and MWeb, but just generally, what are your take?
Yeah, I think first I will say it's a positive that finally this idea that Bitcoin, Litecoin, other transparent cryptocurrencies are anonymous, that idea is finally dying, because it was really dangerous, because it was never true. Like the best case we had on something like Litecoin's layer 1 is fragile pseudonymity. So like in theory, you were pseudonymous and that each address was a unique entity. We didn't know exactly who they tied to. But in reality, the way you actually transact could quickly unwind that. Anytime you had to, like you said, anytime you used a KYC exchange and withdrew, you quickly destroyed that fragile pseudonymity. Even anytime you paid a merchant and had something shipped to your house or something like that, in theory, you destroyed that fragile pseudonymity as well. So it was something that was very much not, like, we shouldn't have ever put trust in it, but for a while it was good enough in the moment. The hard thing, though, is that blockchains, hopefully at least these, will live forever, and the things that you do on them thus lives forever. So even if something is good enough today for privacy and it's not harming you directly in a way you can feel, those transactions are always going to be there and can always be tied back to someone at some point if you mess up. So it, like, that idea that Bitcoin or Litecoin were anonymous or even pseudonymous was dangerous. So I'm glad that is going away. That's a good thing. On the flip side, now that people understand that these things are not actually private by default, are not actually anonymous, taking steps to gain better privacy is quite difficult. Like on the Litecoin side, like you mentioned, thankfully you'll have Mimblewimble extension blocks, MWeb, that which shall hopefully be renamed at some point, and how we talk about it, because I think we need some better terminology around it. But
peg in, peg out, all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to come up with some better terms. But MWeb is a fantastic tool that lets you very easily opt in to better privacy. It's really straightforward. I know we're going to touch on Cakewallet a little bit later, but it was awesome that basically, like, right after I joined Cakewallet, we launched MWeb. It was really cool to get to, like, step into the last part of that process to help to improve the user experience a good bit and make sure that we were really happy with it internally, and to make it as easy as just tapping peg in to move funds into MWeb, tapping peg out when you want to move out, hitting send, and then choosing that you want to pay with MWeb funds. Like, very straightforward to use. That's one of the things that I really love about MWeb, is it's not convoluted. There's no like complications like Lightning and Bitcoin. It's very simple. If you can use layer 1 Litecoin, you can use MWeb, which I really love about that. And that is an important step. I think the big thing in the broader crypto industry is that privacy is just generally hard unless it's built in by default, or unless it's protocol level. Like Bitcoin is a good example of this, where there have been some useful privacy tools over the years. Samurai Wallet's Whirlpool was a fantastic one. Some things that we've been shipping at Cake, Silent Payments, PayJoin, are really fantastic tools, but they each do a little piece of the puzzle. And to actually gain like holistic privacy, you need to do a lot of different steps, which most users are just not going to do, unfortunately. So most users will generally have pretty poor privacy. Now there's a lot of work to make that easier, but that's unfortunately kind of the state of things right now. And taking back that privacy is complex, but the most important part, and you mentioned KYC in the question, the most important part is to, just like when we talked about VPNs, to detach your identity from your activity. Essentially you have to do that with a transparent cryptocurrency like Litecoin, like Bitcoin, or else you will, no matter what you do, you won't have good enough privacy because the roots of what you've done have already been connected back to you. So divorcing those, going to use no KYC exchanges, taking the time to learn what's available there. I'm actually curious if you know of what the like main no KYC exchanges are for Litecoin, because I've never really dug into that, but on Bitcoin, BISC, RoboSats. Yeah, I'm curious.
I know that we've had Dr. Kapil Amarasinghe on the show, and he's doing basic swap DEX, which does appear to be very, very private, does support Litecoin and MWeb Litecoin. And it's kind of like a trustless, decentralized person-to-person setup. It's in other words, it's decentralized exchange. In terms of the centralized exchanges, that is a good question. In terms of what are the non-KYCs, I haven't looked them up in a while. That's it. Actually, that'd be a good something good for us to do. Kind of compile a list of what's. And I would imagine there's a good amount of support for Litecoin, just because it's basically everywhere. So I'd imagine that's also present on non-KYC exchanges too.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious about that. We'll have to dig into it. Maybe we can drop them in the show notes after. But I know on the Bitcoin side, like one of the beautiful things of crypto is if you can get one cryptocurrency, you can swap it to another with essentially no overhead, no extra surveillance, that sort of thing. So like even if you couldn't get Litecoin, no KYC, and you could only get Bitcoin, you could easily swap it to Litecoin without providing KYC at that point, which is a really, really powerful thing there. So that's really that's the most important first step. If you can avoid tying your identity to your on-chain activity, you're going to have a very good base level. And one that's unfortunately better than most people, that's the first step. But then using things like in Litecoin, using MWeb as much as possible is really, really vital. And another thing that I love about the way MWeb is designed is that it's quite compatible with any service. So ideally, yes, you're using MWeb as the person paying and the merchant is accepting via MWeb, so that you have the best possible privacy. But since MWeb is essentially pegging in and out from layer one, if you want to pay someone that's just using a regular Litecoin address, you can still pay from MWeb and have better privacy. Maybe not the best possible privacy, but still have better privacy and not have to do any extra steps to be able to pay them, which is a really powerful aspect of MWeb.
Yeah, basically, if you pay out to an address, to a merchant, whatever, they'll just see the balance of MWeb as the kind of the return amount, which is pretty nice. They may think you're a whale or something, but it's just MWeb. But I agree with MWeb, and I'm happy to see that mobile is growing. Of course, you guys are a big part of that at Cake. I've used the Cakewallet; it works great. You also have support, which I think is something to not underestimate. Where you actually have humans involved. So if you have a question about an update, or maybe an update you thought something was included and it wasn't, you can get on the support channel and they will get back to you. It's actually quite wonderful. So, and that's another thing too, where you're seeing the appetite for privacy technology, specifically in Litecoin, increase, because the balance on the MWeb layer, or the MWeb extension block, extension block, you can track that, mwebexplorer.com. I'll put that in the show notes. It's steadily increasing. It's nothing is parabolic, but it's leveling up and leveling up and leveling up. And I think the more tools offering it, because initially it came out just in the core environment, which I love, nothing wrong with core, but you're not carrying that around your pocket, right? Which I'm not a big fan of carrying any crypto around your pocket, to be honest. But if you do want to spend it, if you are going to a conference, things like that, there's a case to have some on you. But I'm still the old school, keep it off, cold storage is better and things like this. But obviously for functional purposes, we do need to have some on our person if we do want to engage in commerce with crypto, right? And I think Cake is great for that. I know we had one of our earlier shows with Diego Rirar Salazar of the Stack Wallet, and they've supported MWeb recently too. Nexus Wallet, that's a Litecoin Foundation Oregon now taking over for Lite Wallet. So we're having more options on our handhelds, which, to be honest, is where most people are extending the benefits of MWeb, which is super. So
Yeah,
thanks for being a part of that.
yeah. I mean, like I said, it was awesome to be, again, just to be able to be on the cutting edge. Like at Cake, we've always prided ourselves by being first to privacy tech, and so it was awesome to be the first mobile wallet. But it's also far more useful if more wallets support it. So like we are more than happy that Stack Wallet, that Nexus Wallet are supporting MWeb on mobile, because that's going to mean that many more people are willing to use MWeb, and that those people using MWeb also gain far better privacy, because you can undo a lot of the privacy that MWeb gives you if you're like pegging straight into MWeb and then immediately having to peg out to make a payment. There could be some timing and amount heuristics, some analysis there that can kind of attempt to unwind those things with a good quality guess.
Yep.
But if you can stay within MWeb, you have really quite good privacy. And it's like you mentioned, the MWeb balance. Pretty crazy to see that in September of last year, which I think is right around when we launched MWeb, and I'm not saying that we're the sole reason for this, but the MWeb balance has gone from 70,000 Litecoin to 170,000 Litecoin over that last not even a year, which is awesome, rapid growth. And that will only accelerate again as more people can actually use it in their favorite wallet. They don't have to go to a specific wallet to use MWeb. If every major Litecoin wallet supports MWeb, that usage will grow. Hopefully it'll become almost the default long term. And I know that one thing that's been missing so far is cold storage for MWeb. I know that Hector's been doing some good work on that on the Ledger side. Hopefully we'll get that support. That's also something at Cakewallet we're working on, is we have Cupcake, which is a mobile app that's entirely offline. You install it on like an old phone and essentially turn that old phone into a hardware wallet. We will have Litecoin support first, just regular Litecoin, but we are definitely planning on bringing MWeb support, because again, we want people to be able to have privacy both in transit, if you will, when you're actually spending using a mobile wallet, but also at rest when you're just storing your wealth in Litecoin. You should be able to do so privately. So it's something where like we're looking at that. I know that others are working on that with Ledger, hardware wallets, and others. So that'll be an exciting time. And honestly, that will probably make for a massive exponential explosion in the Litecoin MWeb balance, because people will be able to store their value in it rather than just have their hot wallets stored in MWeb.
That's excellent. That's not out yet, Cupcake. That's being planned.
So it is out. It was basically kind of like a let's say an alpha before now, but actually today, as we're recording this, the latest version with a new UI with Bitcoin and Monero support, not Litecoin yet, will go out, and then Litecoin will be next on the list of being added into Cupcake. So hopefully that won't be too long, and I have a direct ETA for when Litecoin specifically will be added. But Bitcoin and Monero support initially, we'll expand that to Litecoin, and then after we do initial Litecoin support, we'll add MWeb as well, which will be exciting.
Very good. That's exciting to hear. I'll have to look into that. Very good. Yeah, I think. Thank you to Hector for what he's done. In fact, he was part of getting the BTC Pay server to integrate MWeb as well, which is awesome. So,
which we're using for Cake Pay. Yeah, I think we were probably the first people to use the extension. It worked fantastically well. He's done amazing work on that. It's been smooth for us so far. We've been using it for since the conference. I know we announced it at the Litecoin Summit. So we've been using MWeb support directly in BTC Pay for people buying gift cards and debit cards at Cake Pay. Since then, that's been smooth sailing. Pretty awesome.
Cool.
Been doing fantastic work.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing Litecoin and Cupcake. I'm going to have to check out Cupcake. I think that sounds like a pretty neat concept. Bitcoin, though, you haven't abandoned Bitcoin. I see a block behind you. I'm not sure if that one's specific or significant to you in terms of the mempool. But you're a privacy guy, and we haven't even talked about, I imagine Monero is your favorite, and I'd like you to elaborate on some of that maybe shortly. But let's start with Bitcoin. It seems like you've not abandoned the idea of Bitcoin, even though it seems nearly impossible to get privacy on Bitcoin in terms of L1 or adopting something like Mimblewimble. It seems that any kind of proposals, from what I'm seeing, seems to be very difficult and not getting any easier, at least for now. But you've not lost your faith in Bitcoin, maybe as a first principle crypto, and you're looking into some of the proposals that are out to improve privacy on Bitcoin. Maybe you can share us why you remain optimistic. Why do you think it's important, and what are some of the things that people are looking to do with Bitcoin to make it more private?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say just kind of broadly, like why I haven't abandoned Bitcoin is that as long as you can use it in a sovereign way, as long as you can take self-custody, as long as you can acquire it without KYC, it's still a very useful tool. Especially because it can, at worst, act as an on-ramp to more private alternatives. So like something we see very commonly in Cakewallet is, and we all have analytics or specifics on this, but just talking to partners about what the most common swap patterns are. We see tons of people essentially bringing Bitcoin in or bringing Litecoin in and swapping to Monero, or bringing Bitcoin in and swapping to Litecoin, using it as an on-ramp because Bitcoin is just ubiquitous. You can get it anywhere. It's much more easily accessible than other cryptocurrencies. Litecoin's up there as well. So Litecoin's definitely not on the same scale as Monero on difficulty to access, but it acts as a fantastic on-ramp. And as long as you can on-ramp in a way that doesn't require KYC and that allows you to keep that pseudonymity, I think it's still a valuable tool there. There's a lot of promise for what it can be if we have better privacy tech. So I mean, like even at Cakewallet, we haven't abandoned Bitcoin. It's been a huge focus for us in bringing privacy tools, cutting edge privacy tools to Bitcoin, because there are some important steps that users can take. And there's some ways that from like the wallet developer side, we can make the user experience really, really good. Silent payments is a good example of that. It's very similar to how MWeb addresses work, where they're a longer reusable payment code that you can get paid to over and over again. And it doesn't reveal the connection between that on-chain, the on-chain address for the actual transaction that's made and that reusable payment code. So it's a very similar concept to MWeb's stealth addresses, to Monero's stealth addresses, but for Bitcoin. And so we've been pushing the boundaries of that, trying to get that adopted more broadly as well. There's also PayJoin, which helps when like, let's say I'm paying you, we can actually work together to build the transaction. So we both contribute inputs, which hides who the true sender is. It hides the amount of the transaction. And it provides better privacy even for people not using the tool, because it can kind of disrupt one of the core heuristics that chain surveillance companies use. So there is still hope for privacy. I think the really difficult thing with Bitcoin is that we basically have to assume that there will be no protocol level changes. So Bitcoin is not going to become Monero. Bitcoin is not going to accept or adopt Mimblewimble extension blocks. It's just not going to happen. I think we should reason with that and understand that that's not going to happen. So we'll do what we can on the privacy side. But when you compare that no KYC onboarding, which people should be doing no matter what, especially with Bitcoin, as the privacy is much harder to attain. If you compare that with some of the other privacy tools available, if you compare that with Lightning, for instance, in a way that's user-friendly, you can get what I would term like barely good enough privacy to be recommendable, but then at worst, people can use that to onboard into things that are more private. And so it's I think for me, you just can't really abandon it wholesale because of how broadly it's available, because of how ubiquitous it is, because of how accessible it is. But rather you can at worst use it as an on-ramp to other things, or at best you can use privacy preserving tools on top of Bitcoin to use it in a good way. But it's never going to be as private or as user-friendly as something like MWeb. It's never going to be as private or as user-friendly as something like Monero. And we have to understand that and view it in the right space where it's, to me, it's a symbiotic tool to these things rather than something that is the end-all be-all. I don't think this Bitcoin-only world, not only is it irrational and it just doesn't exist, the Bitcoin maximalism thing is just like a false front that essentially people put on. We live in a multi-crypto reality. But it's also not viable from a freedom perspective, because I don't think Bitcoin brings everything you need for human freedom in the crypto world.
Yeah, good word. In terms of privacy protocols, more specifically Zcash, Monero, I know there's some other newer ones and smaller ones. Pivx has been around for a long time. Haven't used it in years, but there's been folks. In fact, there's one. This is a rabbit trail. There used to be a Bitcoin Confidential once upon a time. Did you ever remember that?
No, I don't remember that one.
I think it's defunct. Maybe some historian can go spin up an old note or something again. Anyway, it was an interesting concept. It was Bitcoin. Again, we're now muddying the brand a little bit, adding an 11th variety of Bitcoin. But I remember years ago, the Smart Cash people had started that. And Ben Swan actually promoted it for, I would think, around 2017 or 2018. But it was a version of Bitcoin, but it was actually had ring CTs from block 0, but then they made it like proof of stake. It got a little bit wonky, but anyway, I digress. I'd say Zcash, Monero probably the strongest. Do you have any preferences of the main cryptocurrency protocols versus more the minor ones? What's your take on that, or what do you like?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's definitely Monero. Zcash has very interesting technology, and so I've followed it closely over the years and have weighed in on some conversations there and have a lot of thoughts about it. I just actually just wrote a blog post about it a couple weeks ago, so I can throw that your way. Maybe can put it in the show notes for people who want to better understand how I feel about Zcash. But to me, the most important thing when it comes to a privacy preserving digital cash is that it's effective by default. You don't have to do anything extra to gain privacy, but you just have good privacy, whether you understand the need for privacy or not, and that it has broad adoption in the circular economy. You can actually use it to buy goods and services. And Monero is king in both of those and has been king for years. And there's no signs of slowing there or stopping. So it continues to be the main focus for me in terms of like what you actually should spend. I still lean towards Monero. I know this is a Litecoin show, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
But
no problem.
it is still my preference because it is easier even than MWeb is. And that's just a benefit of how Monero has been built from the ground up to be private by default. Now, there are downsides, though, too, and that like a synchronization of a regular Litecoin wallet is essentially instant because you're just saying, here are my addresses, what's my balance? Synchronization of MWeb is more comparable to synchronizing a Monero wallet. So those coming from MWeb will be pretty familiar with the experience with Monero, but it provides just really simple, like once you're synced, really simple, user-friendly digital cash. You just hit send, you gain privacy as the receiver, as the sender, and for the amount. And that to me is something that just has to exist. And that's really where I view like Monero as being a symbiotic tool with things like Litecoin, with things like Bitcoin, because for many people, and this is a thesis I put out in 2020 and have been talking about since, like for most people, I think they're going to want to store their wealth in Bitcoin, most likely, maybe Litecoin, and they'll want to spend Monero. And that will be the duopoly that is the best for the average individual. Because there's proven store value in Bitcoin, there's proven spendability, there's a circular economy, there's strong privacy in Monero. And that pairing is immensely powerful for the individual. And there are many ways that pairing works very seamlessly together. So I think Monero right now is king. Zcash has always been interesting from a tech perspective. They made a lot of poor choices, I think, in terms of governance, in terms of incentives. There's been a lot of just weird stuff in the Zcash scene. But the technology is very good, and that's where like I'm excited that Monero is going to have full chain membership proof soon, which will essentially fix the last remaining potential issue with privacy in Monero using similar technology to Zcash, not the same, but similar technology to how Zcash does that side of things. So definitely interested to see, but Monero I think is still king there and will remain so, just like how Bitcoin's network effects have not stopped or slowed. Monero's on the privacy side are very similar.
What is this whole thing recently? And I don't know much about it. I've seen a few, headlines about it or whatever, tweets. Cubic and some attack on Monero. What is this all about? I'm not convinced. It doesn't sound convincing, but you're the Monero guy. Tell us about what this is, and is it even important?
Yeah, I don't think it's important. It essentially, to me, it just looks like a marketing ploy by a dying cryptocurrency, with the founder essentially trying to find some way to draw in new money and new people to buy his crypto. There's nothing novel about what's going on. Essentially, the Cubic guy has set up a Monero mining pool where you actually get paid in Cubic instead of Monero to mine Monero. And when you mine Monero, it essentially gets like sold for Cubic, and then they burn the Cubic, and it's supposed to pump the price of Cubic. When you do so, and what he's claiming is that all the incentives mean that he's going to have more than 51% of the network hash rate, and he's going to do things with Monero, attack Monero, or just show us how there's a problem. But basically, everything has just been bluster so far. Nothing has happened. He said there was going to be a 51% attack on August 2nd, and that didn't materialize. It is now August 5th.
Yes.
As far as I've seen, the highest hash rate he's achieved during this period when he's supposedly attacking Monero with 51% is something like 20%, or 27.5%, I think is the highest number I've seen so far. So not anywhere close to 51%. I don't think it's something that we should be overly concerned with. And the primary motive to me seems just a marketing ploy of someone wanting to piggyback off of Monero's social capital. But the one thing to remember, obviously, is always that the security of these networks does depend in some way on you, the individual. If you want to step up and help secure Monero, you can do that. You can mine on any piece of hardware. Just like in Litecoin, if you want it to be more secure, you can step up, buy a miner, start doing that today, and do your part to secure the network. So not a reason for like panic or anything like that. To me, just the normal someone trying to benefit off of Monero standing in the space. But we'll definitely see. People are keeping a close eye on it.
Interesting. I know you are also following the Tornado Cash situation, speaking of headlines. And again, something I'm not following intimately. What's going on there and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. So there's a case right now. I'll just do a really quick TLDR. There's a case right now where the United States Department of Justice has brought a case against Roman Storm, who is one of the co-creators of Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash is basically a smart contract on Ethereum. It's immutable. They can't change it. They can't edit it. And it allows users to gain basically like Zcash level privacy within Ethereum. You can deposit funds into the Tornado Cash smart contract. You never give up custody of those funds. Basically, you get a special private key for your funds in Tornado Cash. And then whenever you want, you can go back and use that private key to redeem for those funds to send them wherever you want. And it gives you very strong privacy if you do everything correctly in Ethereum. The case is essentially claiming that Roman and his co-creator built Tornado Cash knowing that they would profit from illicit usage, happy to launder North Korean stolen crypto, like the normal bugaboos in the crypto space and in the broader space. But the very specific things people need to remember is it was non-custodial. There was no ability for Tornado Cash to take custody of users' funds. It wasn't unchangeable. They couldn't prevent anyone from using Tornado Cash. They could change something about the front end because they ran the main website. They did actually implement a block list from Chainalysis that would block known illicit users from using it. And there was no direct profit model either from it. And by everything we knew about the law before then, they were totally above board doing things the right way. This case is essentially trying to change the law through precedent rather than by changing the law itself, and has been going on for the past few weeks. This week, it's still in jury deliberation. So the jury started deliberating on this, I believe, Wednesday last week. Deliberated Wednesday, Thursday, skipped Friday for paperwork reason, and then picked back up yesterday and are still deliberating as of this morning. So it's unclear yet if they'll get a conviction or not. It seems very promising for the defense. The case went quite well for Roman Storm, all things considered. And the jury's deliberation being this long is normally a good sign for the defense as well. So we'll see what comes out of it. But the big thing that this would do is, like we talked about earlier in the show, this is essentially an attack on that precedent of code as free speech, because the actual code here was published on Ethereum and it was an immutable smart contract. They can't change it. They can't say, oh no, bad guys are using our smart contract, let's just turn it off. They literally cannot do that technologically. So it's an interesting case of, if the code that you publish is used by bad actors, even if you have no ability to prevent it, are you still liable for the way that code is used? And that essentially would either confirm or destroy the precedent of code as free speech that we have in the US. So it's a very pivotal case, probably the most pivotal case of the last decade in the crypto space for sure, and within the free and open source space as well. So very important. We'll probably have a verdict this week, but who knows? I'm not sure if there's a hard deadline or not for them to decide, but they're still deliberating as of today, which is August 5th.
Got it. Very good. I'm going to consider our time here. I want to wrap up fairly soon. Your thoughts on CBDCs? Are these, is there a place in the world for them? Of course, the market wants them to a degree. Should they be not CBDC, stable coins? And would they lead, for example, to a CBDC? That's how I meant to say this. A lot of people are using stable coins. Some people are saying these are just backdoors to getting CBDCs. Do you agree with that? What are your take on that kind of slippery slope?
Yeah. So the answer ultimately is it depends, because there's multiple ways that a stablecoin can exist. Like for instance, USDC and Tether, USDT, are essentially CBDCs. Like they give full visibility into what's being done. They give full ability for funds to be confiscated or frozen. They give full ability for a central entity to print or destroy money at will. Like they have most of the same controls as a CBDC. Not quite as much, because ultimately a CBDC could also grant the ability for like a government to specify how you can spend things, and in theory, they can't do that without control over like the Ethereum network. But in practice, there's a lot of ways they could still have almost CBDC level control of those stable coins. So I think we definitely do need to be wary of those. And the fascinating thing with a lot of the like pro crypto stuff in the Trump administration is that it very much seems like they see stable coins as a benefit to the hegemony of the US dollar and want their proliferation. Like they want everyone using USDC and Tether because it means everyone's using dollars, which means the US government specifically benefits. So I think we definitely need to be wary. I think the important thing to remember, though, is that not all stablecoins are created equal. So there are decentralized stablecoins that don't have the same central control. Things like DAI, DAI on Ethereum, things like D-Euro on Ethereum. There are ways to create a stablecoin where the creator does not have ultimate control over how it's used. Now, obviously, they could potentially, once the smart contract's deployed, depending on how it's deployed, it might not even be changeable. But there can be a difference, but I think we definitely should be wary and should be on guard against how these things will be used, and understanding that using them is still essentially trusting a central entity to not rug pull us, to not stop what we're doing. Whereas the unstoppable stuff will always be preferred in my book and should be at least readily available for people to use things like Litecoin directly, rather than putting trust in a stable coin. But one of the real benefits, too, of even stable coins that are centrally controlled is that they don't have an ID tied directly to them in many cases. So, like, I can use Tether, and yes, it's not ideal from a censorship resistance perspective, but I can use Tether in a way that's far better for privacy than I could use any other form of a digital dollar. Now, obviously, cash would always be better, but in basically any other way that I can use a digital dollar, I have to tie my ID to it. And I don't have to do that with stable coins. So there are still some advantages over it, even for those that are centrally controlled, but it can be a slippery slope, and we should be on guard to how exactly they're used.
Good word. I know I want to say you do this weekly. Pardon me if I'm misspeaking, but you have a Spaces sort of about freedom tech. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to just talk about that generally. Your take on freedom tech. Of course, we've talked about Cake. You're going to be a part of that. Litecoin, MWeb, these privacy tools, maybe the VPNs. What does the freedom tech space look like to you? What's exciting you currently there? What do you think people absolutely need to be utilizing as at least a baseline of privacy? Just kind of elaborate on this whole freedom tech space and why you're so interested in it.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, broadly, this idea of freedom tech is basically just what technology empowers you, the individual, rather than empowers someone else to have control over you. So it basically encompasses anything that is free and open source software, and that is at least giving you easy access to privacy preserving tools. So it's a very broad category. It's basically just a way to kind of help encapsulate that technology that empowers you, the individual. As far as like what's exciting for me, I mean, like I said, like it's hard with all of the bad news in 2025 around the crypto space, around the privacy space. It's easy to get discouraged and to like miss the forest for the trees, so to speak. But there's a lot of just fantastic stuff happening in the space. Like privacy preserving messengers are becoming ubiquitous. It's easier than ever to have private one-on-one conversations. Privacy preserving email storage, etc., are better than ever. Like you can use Proton for most things that you could use Google for and have strong end-to-end encryption with open source software. VPNs, like we talked about, are better than ever. There's things like Obscura, which are a new model for VPNs that provide even better privacy, still require trust. The caveat I talked at length about earlier, but still provide better privacy than anything in the VPN space has before. There's, like we talked about, MWeb on Litecoin is adoption is going through the roof, and we're seeing more and more people take that on. And I think like the icing on the cake is that the more there are crackdowns and crazy court cases and insane things like the ID verification going on in Europe, the more people wake up to understand suddenly, oh, I actually need to care about this. Like I haven't cared about it because it never affected me, but now suddenly I'm realizing like maybe it's not a good idea that I have to put in my ID at every website I use. Like maybe there are some downsides to this. And it starts this feedback loop where more people wake up. The tools are better than ever in 2025 and are immensely usable and user-friendly, I would say, in most cases. they wake up, they now have tools that are actually useful. They start using those tools, they pay money to use those tools get better as a result. And this feedback loop, this cycle in the arms race, so to speak, in the privacy space continues because the tools themselves get better, the accessibility gets better, and we all benefit as a result. So it's definitely an exciting time to be in the space. Freedom tech is flourishing, but that will always create this feedback loop of freedom tech flourishes. There's going to be crackdowns by those who would prefer that individuals did not have freedom and had to rely on some other trusted individual or trusted entity. So there will always be ups and downs, but it is really encouraging and a good time to be in the space.
I like the optimism. I think it's good to be optimistic, have a bright outlook, keeps you motivated to continue and actually take action where your feet are planted. Because I think sometimes we can think, oh, there's nothing I can do. It's impossible. So these are good words. It would almost be amazing to end right there, but I can't. I have to ask you about AI. It's obviously the cat's out of the bag. It seems to be accelerating. And I am concerned from a privacy angle. How do we view AI? And is it privacy preserving, or is it kind of another surveillance tool? Are the prompts you're entering forever, wherever you're typing them? I mean, not to mention putting your own images in there. There's a lot of things we need to think about with privacy with AI. So maybe just a few words there.
Yeah, when you kind of break down the idea of AI, you have to look at the two different sides of it. One is the you using ChatGPT side, and one is how are these models trained. So I think on the actual usage side, in many ways, it's not any different than a search engine. For most people, they're doing the same things they would do in Google, but they're maybe going to more lengths. They're getting a little bit more intimate than normal. So there are some horrible sides of that.
With companions, I'd say way more intimate than
That's
normal.
Yeah.
I don't think you're solving the birth crisis, Mr. Musk. I digress.
Yeah, no, he is definitely not with that insanity, but that is true that there's more that you would get into there than normal. The good thing is that side of things is actually quite solvable. There's already some good privacy preserving AI solutions out there. The one that I'll say right now that is the most promising is Maple AI. It's just trymaple.ai. Basically, they built a solution that's actually technologically privacy preserving. Most of the other privacy preserving AI services are really just a commitment to not log your queries, which is fine. It's the same kind of trust model as a VPN in that you theoretically can use them anonymously and you can pay for them with crypto, and things like Venice AI are a good example of that.
Yeah, Venice,
but
yeah.
There's no technological protection for your privacy in those. Whereas something like Maple, they're actually doing it in a way that's encrypted by default and does not reveal your queries to them or even to the back end AI operator. So those are really important and good, and that's a relatively easy problem to fix. Is probably an understatement, but relatively easy problem to fix. The bigger problem is that on the training side, how do we create these AI models? For a long time, really the sole incentive for entities to collect our data was to be able to sell it to ad agencies, to sell it to companies who want to hit you with specific marketing. And that was the main incentive for collecting your data, no matter what, was they wanted to be able to sell your data because your data is immensely valuable. Unfortunately, now we have a second incentive, and this one right now is far, far larger, which is how do I train AI? I want to do it on more than just what's publicly available, because the edge that I can get as a company making AI models is if I can get data that someone else can't, potentially I can make a better model than anyone else can. And so there's already been many, many instances of companies training AI data on essentially private data, things that they're not supposed to have access to. But since they get access to, they train on it because in theory, it creates a better model. And that gives them an edge in the market. And there's immense capital flowing into the AI space. That's the more worrying side of this for me from a privacy perspective. And that's more where you just having good online digital privacy will protect you against that. The same thing that we've always talked about with digital privacy, whether it was against nation states or corporations farming your data for ad monopolies. Now AI is just another one of those things, but it means that there's even more money now being poured into companies wanting access to your data that they maybe didn't even want access to before, because now it's even more valuable than it was. So it's, I think, just more incentive for us as individuals to take our privacy seriously, because there's going to be more and more attacks against it. Again, not by people necessarily just wanting to destroy us individually, but people that see a profit model now that is built around training AI models on data that they maybe didn't previously care about, or thought was too difficult to access or too costly to access. Now they've got even more money to flow behind that. So more of an onus on us as individuals to take our personal privacy seriously.
Yeah, and we should. I think something else I thought about with AI, and this is sort of down the road, I have some folks that I know that are extremely concerned about it, and I can see where they're coming from. But the idea that we're getting these models producing more content, video now, moving images that are more and more compelling or more realistic, that this could basically drive governments, authorities, whatever, to have humans prove humanity, to basically say your content is human generated, real, and you are the real deal, right? Because we're so flooded with disinformation, with AI imagery that no one knows if it's actually real or not. Prove your humanity. Give us your biometrics. Give us your IDs. I do see something in that, and that's a very ugly, more of a dystopian view. Do you ever consider these things? Is that totally crazy to think something like this, or have you thought of those kind of concerns as we continue to evolve with AI in terms of a society using it more and more, and it looking more and more like society?
Yeah, no, it's definitely not crazy, and it's definitely something I think about. I think the interesting thing here is you can do essentially everything you would need to prove that something is real and not AI generated in a way that doesn't reveal who you are. Like, this is a perfect use case for zero knowledge proofs, for the ability to prove that I am within a set, but not who I am. So let's say, for instance, you already have a government ID. Like, you already are doxed to your government. You have to be, generally. Obviously, there are exceptions, but you have to be. So if we could have the ability to prove using a set of private keys, like we already do with crypto, to prove, hey, I am a legitimate human, I am in this set, I am a citizen of the United States that is legitimate, without revealing who I am, there's not really a privacy harm in that. Now, the harm in that is that it could be easier to be censored, and that if the government removes you from that set, you no longer have access to all of these things. Like, that's more the concern there. But from a privacy perspective, you can do it in a way that's privacy preserving. Now, will it be done that way? Unfortunately, no, probably not. Like, the EU is showing that they will do it in the worst possible way, which is cause every separate individual to figure out their own way, or every company or website to figure out their own way to verify ID. And then there's even more databases that have our ID in it. So it unfortunately likely will go worse than that. But there are ways to do it in a way that's privacy preserving. I think the other thing to keep in mind is, like, there are some interesting ways where you can, again, use like private public key cryptography to prove the authenticity of images and videos by the actual hardware you record them on, using those keys to sign those files. It still gets a little bit weird, but that's something where, like, an Android or iPhone could do this and use some sort of like proof system that it is a legitimate recording and that it was not generated by AI. How exactly that works, I don't know the specifics of, but that would be possible. It would be interesting. I think the one good outcome of this, like the AI craze of AI generating everything these days, is hopefully people will just start to not trust anything they see, which sounds weird.
I think it's happening.
It needs to happen. We were already there. Like, so much of what we saw online was already fake, even if it was human generated and not AI generated. So much of it was already fake. And we've now reached this paradigm where, like, you should basically assume everything on social media is fake unless you have some specific reason to know that it's real. And there are some good outcomes in that. And, like, people just stop blindly trusting things people post on social media and resort to more friend groups and family, and relying on individuals they actually know, like humans that they can verify are humans, relying on them directly for information rather than some mindless corporation or something. But that will be a tricky problem. I'm sure that some malicious politicians will try to push laws around it because they see this as an opportunity. But I think thankfully it can also just be a push for people to focus on actual human relationships, actual human connection, instead of on the platforms where this is most rampant, which is essentially social media platforms.
Very good. Good words. Seth, it's been great having you here. Truly appreciate it. Interesting conversation. Clearly, you're very knowledgeable about all of this, and we appreciate having you share it with us. hopefully we'll have you back sometime. But before we go, maybe is there anything you wanted to leave us with, or that we didn't bring up, or how would you like to end the show?
No, I think we covered the vast majority. I think the only thing I would leave people with, and if you've ever listened to me speak, I've probably said this before, but just like take personal privacy step by step. Don't dive in everything. Even everything that we talked about today would probably be overwhelming if you started doing it all at once. But just take it step by step, figure out what is most important to you, and start taking some actionable steps to reclaim your privacy. I think beyond that, I would just say, just quickly kind of shout out Cakewallet. Like the reason that I can wake up at 7 a.m. and do this call and it not be a problem is that I get the privilege of being the VP of Cakewallet, have a lot of flexibility, and that I get the privilege of working on Freedom Tech every day, which is just absolutely fantastic. Getting to ship things like MWeb for Litecoin on mobile, getting to actually help people reclaim their financial privacy every day is really awesome. So I'm grateful for that. If you want a good mobile wallet that cares deeply about personal privacy, cakewallet.com. We've got you covered. There's a lot of other good ones in this space as well. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Very good. Appreciate you coming on. Of course, to all of our listeners or viewers, whether you're watching on X or on YouTube, listening to us wherever you get your podcast, we thank you. Of course, you can find this episode and every other episode at 84million.com/podcast. And again, Seth For Privacy is with us. Find him on X at Seth For Privacy and check our show notes. I think we're going to have a good amount of other resources from Seth that you can check out as well. So again, thanks for your time today, and talk to you soon, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
Yes, sir.